The letter trembled in Lena Harlow's work-worn hands, each word a hammer blow against the fragile hope she had been clinging to since they buried her father 3 weeks ago. Cedar Ridge Bank, in its cold corporate efficiency, had given her exactly 30 days. 30 days to plow 160 acres of Oklahoma red earth. 30 days to plant a crop that would prove a pregnant woman working alone could make land produce. 30 days to validate everything her father had died trying to protect. If she failed, the bank would auction the property to the highest bidder. And Lena knew exactly who that would be. Clarence Wade had been waiting for this moment like a vulture circling a dying animal, patient and predatory, his smile never quite reaching his eyes whenever their paths crossed in town. She stood now at the edge of her father's grave, the simple wooden cross already weathering in the relentless May sun. Victor Harlow died May 1893, beloved father. The words carved into the wood seemed inadequate for a man who had given everything to transform raw territory into something that could sustain life, who had taken an orphaned infant and raised her as his own, asking nothing of the world except the chance to work honest ground with honest hands. Lena folded the letter and placed it on the fresh-turned earth, her gesture both prayer and promise. The wind caught the edge of the paper, making it flutter like something alive trying to escape. She pressed her palm flat against the dirt to hold it down. "I won't let him win, Papa," she whispered, her voice breaking on the last word. "I swear it." The baby inside her chose that moment to kick, a sharp reminder that she was fighting not just for memory and legacy, but for a future she could barely imagine. 7 months pregnant, alone, facing down an impossible deadline and a powerful enemy. The odds were stacked so high against her that a sensible woman would have already started packing. Lena Harlow had never been accused of being sensible. She straightened slowly, one hand supporting her lower back where the constant ache had taken up permanent residence. The homestead spread before her in the afternoon heat, the small wooden house her father had built, board by board. The barn that leaned slightly to the east but had weathered 15 Oklahoma winters, the chicken coop where a dozen hens scratched and muttered their endless complaints about the quality of their accommodations. And beyond that, the fields. 160 acres of possibility and burden stretching toward a horizon that shimmered with heat waves. Most of it still unplowed, waiting for hands and muscle and determination she was not sure she possessed, but she would try. God help her, she would try. 3 weeks earlier, the trying had begun with a scream she did not remember making. Lena had found her father in the east field, tangled in the harness of the plow, his body broken by the massive draft horse that had spooked at something, some shadow or sound or memory of wildness that civilized service could not quite erase. The animal had bolted, dragging Victor and the ancient iron plow across rocky ground until the harness finally broke and the horse thundered away, leaving destruction in its wake. By the time Lena reached him, running with a speed that seemed impossible for someone in her condition, fighting through the stabbing pain in her side and the terror that made her vision narrow to a tunnel, he was already gone. His eyes were open to the merciless sky, one hand still reaching toward the land he had spent his life trying to tame. She had knelt beside him in the red dirt, cradling his head in her lap, and wept until no more tears would come. Then she had walked the 1.5 miles to the Mendoza place and asked Rosa to help her bring her father home. The funeral had been small. Rosa Mendoza, her husband, Miguel, doctor, Samuel Bright, and a handful of Mexican families who remembered Victor Harlow as one of the few white men who had treated them with simple human decency. They stood in the spring sunshine and sang hymns in Spanish while Lena stared at the coffin and tried to understand how the world could continue turning when the center of her universe had stopped. Clarence Wade had attended, standing at a respectful distance in his expensive suit, his hat held over his heart in a gesture of mourning that looked practiced and hollow. He had approached her afterward, his handshake lingering just a moment too long, his condolences delivered with the oily smoothness of a man already counting his winnings. "Your father was a complicated man, Miss Harlow," he had said. his pale eyes assessing her condition with an expression she could not quite read. "If you find yourself struggling with the burden of this property, I want you to know I'm prepared to make a generous offer, enough to start fresh somewhere more suitable for a woman in your circumstances." Lena had pulled her hand from his grip, fighting the urge to wipe it on her black mourning dress. "My father didn't die so I could sell his legacy to you, Mr. Wade." Something had flickered behind Clarence's polite mask, something cold and patient and utterly ruthless. "Your father took something from me once, Miss Harlow. I'm simply waiting to take it back." He had tipped his hat and walked away, leaving her with those words like a stone in her stomach. 2 weeks after the funeral, Lena had finally worked up the courage to visit Dr. Bright's office in Cedar Ridge. She had been telling herself that the changes in her body were simply stress, grief manifesting in physical form, nothing that rest and time would not cure. But when she could no longer button her skirts, and the exhaustion became so profound that climbing the porch steps left her breathless, denial became impossible. Dr. Samuel Bright was 70, if he was a day, with a shock of white hair and hands that shook slightly from age, but remained steady enough when they mattered. He had been delivering babies and setting bones in Oklahoma Territory since before it had a proper name, and his eyes held the kind of weary compassion that came from seeing every variation of human suffering and joy. He had examined her with professional efficiency, his face carefully neutral, before sitting down across from her with a heavy sigh. "You're about 6 months along, Lena. Maybe closer to 7. When was your last monthly?" The room had tilted sideways. 6 months? 7. Which meant the baby had been conceived before Thomas left, during those brief weeks when Lena had allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found someone who would stay. Thomas Birch had been a cowboy drifter, 25 years old with an easy smile and restless feet. He had hired on at the Harlow place for spring planting, working alongside Victor with a competence that earned grudging respect. He had courted Lena with wild flowers picked from the roadside and stories about places he had been, dreams he carried like loose change in his pockets. She had known better than to trust those dreams. Her father had warned her, gently but firmly, that men like Thomas did not put down roots, that the horizon always called louder than any woman's voice. But she had been lonely, and he had been kind, and for a few stolen weeks she had let herself imagine a different future. Then Thomas had left to find work in the Texas Panhandle, promising to return before winter with enough money saved to start something real. That had been 4 months ago. The letters she sent to the last address he gave her came back unopened, marked undeliverable. She did not know if he was dead or simply gone, and she was not sure which possibility hurt more. Dr. Bright had waited patiently while these memories crashed over her, then handed her a handkerchief when the tears finally came. "Does anyone else know?" he asked quietly. Lena shook her head, pressing the fabric against her eyes. "I didn't know. I thought it was just grief making me sick. I thought the weight was from not being able to eat properly." "And the father?" "Gone. Maybe dead. I don't know." The doctor had been quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Lena, I'm going to speak plainly because you deserve honesty. Carrying a child to term while working a homestead alone is dangerous. Add in the stress you're under, the physical labor required, and you're looking at real risk to yourself and the baby." "What are you suggesting?" "That you consider your options. You have family elsewhere?" "No one. My father was all I had." "Friends who might take you in until the birth?" Lena had thought of Rosa Mendoza, who had held her hand during the funeral and whispered comfort in Spanish, but the Mendoza family had 6 children of their own and barely enough land to sustain them. She would not add to their burden. "I can manage," she said, hearing the hollow bravado in her own voice. Dr. Bright had leaned forward, his expression gentle but firm. "Lena, pride is a luxury you cannot afford right now. If you try to work that land alone in your condition, you're going to hurt yourself, or worse." She had left his office with a tonic for the morning sickness and advice she had no intention of following. What choice did she have? The land needed working. The bank needed proof of productivity. Her child needed a future, and the only future Lena could offer was the one her father had built from Oklahoma dirt and immigrant determination. For the next week, she had tried to maintain the impossible, rising before dawn to feed the chickens and milk the cow, spending hours behind the old plow with their remaining draft horse, pushing her body past reasonable limits while the baby grew heavier and the work grew harder. She made it through 7 acres before her body began sending distress signals she could no longer ignore. Cramping in her abdomen, dizziness that came in waves, a persistent ache in her lower back that sometimes flared into something sharper, more urgent, more frightening. On the 8th day, she collapsed. The sun had been merciless that morning, climbing into a cloudless sky and baking the earth until it cracked. Lena had been 3 hours into plowing when the world started to blur at the edges, sounds becoming muffled and distant. She tried to call out to the horse, tried to pull back on the reins, but her hands would not obey. The last thing she remembered was the red earth rushing up to meet her, and a strange, distant thought that this was how her father had died, face down in the dirt he loved. Then there were hoofbeats, fast and urgent, growing closer, strong hands lifting her. A voice, deep and steady, cutting through the fog in her mind. "Stay with me, just stay with me." The rocking motion of a horse moving at speed, heat and dust, and the smell of leather. She tried to open her eyes, but the light was too bright, too sharp. Tried to speak, but her throat was desert dry. "Almost there. You're going to be fine." She did not know that voice, did not recognize the arms that held her so carefully, as if she were something precious and breakable. The confusion was almost worse than the pain. When consciousness finally returned fully, she found herself lying on a leather couch in a room she did not recognize. Dark wood paneling, hunting trophies mounted on the walls, the scent of tobacco and old books, a man she had never seen before standing by the window, his back to her, shoulders tense beneath a work shirt that had seen better days. Lena tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. The room spun violently, her stomach lurching in protest. The man turned at the sound of her movement, crossing the room in 3 long strides. "Easy. Don't try to stand yet. The doctor's on his way." He was tall, she noticed, even from her horizontal position, probably 40 or close to it, with dark hair showing the first silver threads at the temples and eyes the color of winter sky. His face was weathered in the way of men who spent their lives outdoors, lines carved deep around his mouth and across his forehead. There was something solid about him, something that suggested he did not move unless he meant to, and did not speak unless he had something worth saying. "Who are you?" Lena managed, her voice coming out rougher than intended. "Cade Thornton. I own the ranch north of your property." The name meant nothing to her. Victor had kept to himself, had not socialized much with neighboring landowners. But there was something in the way this man looked at her, a kind of careful assessment that made her suddenly aware of her condition, her disheveled state, the vulnerability of her situation. "What happened?" she asked. "I saw you collapse in your field. Brought you here because it was closer than town. Dr. Bright should arrive any minute." "You were watching me?" Something flickered in those winter sky eyes. Not quite guilt, but acknowledgement of an intrusion. "I've been keeping an eye on your place since your father passed, making sure you were managing." The presumption of it sparked anger through Lena's confusion and fear. "I don't need a keeper, Mr. Thornton." "No," he agreed quietly. "But you might need a doctor. And you definitely needed someone to catch you before you cracked your skull on a plow blade." The truth of that deflated her righteous indignation. She closed her eyes, one hand moving instinctively to her abdomen. The baby shifted restlessly, and she felt a flood of relief so intense it brought fresh tears. "Is the baby all right?" she whispered. "I don't know. That's why I sent for Dr. Bright." They waited in uncomfortable silence, Lena studying the ceiling, while Cade Thornton returned to his position by the window, a careful distance maintained, as if he understood that proximity would only increase her unease. When Dr. Bright finally arrived, bustling into the room with his medical bag and a disapproving scowl, Lena had never been so grateful to see a familiar face. The examination was thorough and mortifying, conducted in a bedroom upstairs while Cade Thornton waited below. Rosa Mendoza appeared at some point, summoned by some invisible network of communication, and held Lena's hand while the doctor pressed and prodded and listened with his stethoscope. "Finally, doctor." Bright straightened, his expression grave but not catastrophic. "The baby's heartbeat is strong. But Lena, you've pushed yourself into early labor. The contractions have stopped for now. But if you keep working like you have been, you'll deliver that child months too soon. And neither of you will survive it." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples of implication spreading outward. "What do I need to do?" Lena asked, though she already knew the answer and dreaded it. "Complete bed rest. No work, no lifting, no stress. You need to stay off your feet for at least 2 weeks, preferably longer." "That's impossible. I have 30 days to plow and plant, or the bank takes my land." Dr. Bright exchanged a look with Rosa, who shook her head sadly. "The land won't matter if you're dead, mija. I can't just lie in bed while everything my father built gets auctioned off to Clarence Wade." Lena's voice cracked on the banker's name, frustration and fear making her want to scream. "Then accept help when it's offered," Rosa said gently, smoothing the hair back from Lena's forehead with maternal tenderness. "What help? I don't have money to hire anyone. I can barely afford to feed myself, let alone pay workers." "Mr. Thornton has already offered his men," Dr. Bright said quietly. "He's willing to finish plowing your fields and get the crops planted. No charge." Lena stared at him, searching for the angle, the hidden cost. Men like Cade Thornton, men with resources and land and power, did not simply give away labor out of charitable impulse. There was always a price, always strings attached that you did not see until you were already tangled in them. "Why?" she demanded. "Why would he do that?" Rosa and Dr. Bright exchanged another look, this one longer, weighted with knowledge they were deciding whether to share. Finally, the doctor sat down on the edge of the bed, his ancient joints creaking in protest. "Lena, do you know anything about the Prairie Fire of 1873? She shook her head slowly, unease growing in her chest. "There was a massive wildfire that year, swept through this whole region, killed dozens of people, burned thousands of acres. Your father was working for one of the big ranches at the time, and when the fire came through, he ran into the flames to save people who were trapped." Lena had heard this story before, or parts of it. Victor had never spoken much about his own heroism, but Rosa had mentioned it once or twice, pride evident in her voice. "One of the people he saved that day," Dr. Bright continued, his voice gentle, "was a young pregnant woman named Margaret Thornton, Cade's wife." The revelation hit Lena like a physical blow. The room seemed to contract around her, the air growing thin. My father saved his wife? Carried her out of a burning building while the roof was collapsing. Margaret was 7 months pregnant at the time, unconscious from smoke inhalation. The doctors weren't sure if the baby would survive, but your father's quick action gave them both a chance. "Did the baby live?" Lena asked, though something in Dr. Bright's expression already suggested the answer. "No. Margaret miscarried 2 months later, the trauma from the fire," the doctor said, "and Margaret herself died 5 years ago from complications of illness. Cade never remarried, never had children." The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture Lena was not sure she wanted to see. "So he feels he owes my father a debt. A debt he can never fully repay," Dr. Bright agreed. "Victor Harlow saved the woman Cade loved and gave them 2 more years together than they would have had otherwise. Now Cade sees Victor's daughter struggling alone, pregnant and desperate, and he has the means to help. Can you understand why he might want to?" Lena closed her eyes, pride warring with practicality, independence colliding with necessity. She had spent her entire life watching her father work himself to exhaustion, had seen how the weight of obligation could crush a person's spirit. The thought of owing anyone anything, especially a stranger with his own complicated history of loss, made her want to refuse on principle alone. But there was a child to consider now, a future that extended beyond her own stubborn need to prove she could manage without help. "How much would this cost me?" she asked finally, opening her eyes to meet Dr. Bright's compassionate gaze. "Today? $12 for my services. The pregnancy care moving forward, we can work out payment terms. And Mr. Thornton's labor? He says no charge. Consider it settled business between him and your father." Lena was quiet for a long moment, her hand resting on her abdomen, where the baby had finally settled into stillness. She thought about Victor Harlow running into flames, about the split-second decision to risk everything for a stranger. Her father had never asked for recognition or reward for that act of courage. He had simply done what needed doing because it was right. Maybe accepting help was not weakness. Maybe it was its own kind of courage. "All right," she whispered. "Tell Mr. Thornton I accept his offer." Relief washed over Dr. Bright's weathered features. "Good. You'll stay here at the ranch for the next 2 weeks while you recover. Rosa will make sure you follow orders. I can't impose on Mr. Thornton's hospitality for 2 weeks." "You can and you will," Rosa said firmly, her tone brooking no argument. "Cade has more empty rooms than he knows what to do with, and I could use the company. It's settled, mija." Before Lena could formulate another protest, there was a knock at the door and Cade Thornton entered, his hat in his hands, his expression carefully neutral. "How is she?" he asked Dr. Bright, as if Lena were not right there, conscious and listening. "She'll be fine if she follows orders and stays off her feet. I've explained the situation. She's agreed to accept your help." Cade's eyes shifted to Lena, and she saw something complicated move through them. Relief, certainly, but also a kind of pain that suggested this decision cost him something too, reminded him of failures he could not undo and losses he still carried. "Thank you," Lena said quietly, forcing the words past her pride, "for bringing me here, for offering your men, for whatever debt you think you owe my father." "I don't think I owe him," Cade said, his voice low and rough around the edges. "I know I do. He gave me 2 more years with my wife. That's a gift I can never fully repay, but I can try." He turned to Dr. Bright. "What does she need? Medicine? Special food? I'll have Rosa prepare whatever's necessary." As the 2 men conferred about her care as if she were a child, Lena found herself studying Cade Thornton with new eyes. This man who had been a stranger an hour ago, who had watched her struggle from a distance, who now offered his home and resources to someone he barely knew. There was something broken in him, she realized, some fundamental wound that had never properly healed. The way he held himself, the careful distance he maintained, the shadow that crossed his face whenever Dr. Bright mentioned his late wife. This was a man who had learned to protect what remained of his heart by keeping the world at arm's length. And yet he was opening his door to her, risking that careful isolation for the sake of an old debt and common decency. Lena did not know what to make of Cade Thornton, but as exhaustion finally claimed her, and she drifted into uneasy sleep, she found herself hoping that accepting his help would not prove to be another mistake in a life that seemed full of them. When she woke again, evening had fallen. The room was lit by lamplight, casting warm shadows across unfamiliar walls. Someone had covered her with a quilt that smelled faintly of lavender and old cedar. Through the open window, she could hear the sounds of a working ranch settling in for the night. Horses nickering in their stalls, men calling to each other in Spanish and English, the distant lowing of cattle. Rosa appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray with soup and bread, her round face creased with concern and something softer. "Awake, mija? Good. You need to eat. The baby needs nourishment." Lena accepted the tray gratefully, her stomach reminding her that she had not eaten since early morning. The soup was thick with vegetables and rich with flavor, the bread still warm from the oven. She ate slowly, savoring each bite while Rosa puttered around the room, straightening things that did not need straightening. "This was her room, wasn't it?" Lena asked quietly. "Margaret's." Rosa's hands stilled on the curtain she had been adjusting. "Yes. Cade had me prepare it when he sent word you were coming. I offered to set up one of the guest rooms, but he insisted on this one." "Why?" The older woman was quiet for a moment, her dark eyes distant with memory. "I think because Margaret would have wanted it. She was always bringing home strays, injured animals, people down on their luck. She believed everyone deserved a safe place to heal." Rosa smiled sadly. "And maybe because Cade needs to remember that this room can hold life again, not just ghosts." Lena set down her spoon, no longer hungry despite the excellent food. "Tell me about her." "Margaret." Rosa settled into the chair by the window, her hands folding in her lap in the way of women accustomed to long stories and patient listening. She was light, that one. "You know how some people can walk into a room and make everything brighter just by being there? That was Margaret. She laughed easily, loved fiercely, saw the best in everyone." "How did she die?" "Fever. It started simple, just a cold that wouldn't quite leave, but it got into her lungs, and by the time Dr. Bright could do anything, it was too late. She suffered for 3 weeks before the end. Cade never left her side, held her hand through every bad night, read to her when she was strong enough to listen, whispered promises about all the things they would do when she got better." Rosa's voice broke slightly. "He knew she wouldn't get better, but he promised anyway." Lena felt tears prick her eyes, grief for people she had never known mixing with her own fresh loss. "How long ago?" 5 years this coming August. He hasn't touched this room since the day she died, kept everything exactly as she left it, until today." The weight of that gesture settled over Lena like a physical thing. Cade Thornton had broken 5 years of careful preservation to make space for a pregnant stranger. What did that cost him? What ghosts was he displacing to offer her shelter? "I shouldn't be here," Lena said softly. "This is too much, too personal." "Nonsense. You need care, and this room needs purpose." Margaret would approve. Rosa stood, smoothing her apron with practical efficiency. "Now finish your soup and get some rest. Tomorrow, Cade's men will start on your fields. You focus on healing. Everything else will sort itself." After Rosa left, Lena lay in the gathering darkness and tried to imagine the woman who had lived in this room, who had chosen the wallpaper with its delicate rose pattern, who had arranged the furniture just so to catch the morning light. A woman her father had saved. A woman who had loved and been loved by the complicated man offering Lena sanctuary. The baby kicked, a gentle reminder that the past was past and the future was coming, whether she was ready or not. Lena placed both hands on her swollen abdomen and made another promise to add to all the others. "I'll get through this," she whispered to the child who could not yet hear her. "I'll keep the land. I'll give you the future your grandfather wanted. And somehow I'll find a way to repay the debt we're accumulating with a man who seems determined not to be repaid." Outside her window she could see lights in what must be Cade's study, a lone figure moving back and forth behind the curtains. Was he thinking about Margaret? About the room he had finally allowed someone else to occupy? About the pregnant woman sleeping in his dead wife's bed? Lena did not know. But as exhaustion finally claimed her and she drifted into dreams troubled by fire and loss and the endless red earth that defined her world, she could not shake the feeling that accepting Cade Thornton's help had set something in motion that neither of them fully understood. Outside, the Oklahoma night sang its ancient song of wind and stars and land that remembered everything, forgot nothing, and waited patiently to see what desperate humans would do when survival required more than pride could offer. 8 days had passed since Lena Harlow collapsed in her field, and in that time the world had shifted in ways both profound and subtle. She woke each morning in Margaret Thornton's room to the sound of men working her land, the rhythmic calls and responses of Cade's crew creating a soundtrack of industry and purpose. Through her window she could watch the progress they made, acres of red earth turned and prepared, furrows straight as rifle shots stretching toward the horizon. Rosa had proven herself a benevolent tyrant when it came to enforcing Dr. Bright's orders. 3 times Lena had tried to venture downstairs to help with cooking or cleaning, some useful occupation to justify her presence in this house. 3 times Rosa had physically blocked her path, hands on ample hips, scolding in rapid Spanish that needed no translation. El doctor says rest, so you rest, mija. The work will still be there when you're strong enough. Right now, your only job is growing that baby. So Lena rested, though rest felt like torture for someone accustomed to dawn until dusk labor. She sat in the chair by the window and watched Cade's ranch operate with the smooth efficiency of a well-tuned machine. She read books from Margaret's collection, discovering a woman who loved poetry and philosophy in equal measure. She listened to Rosa's stories about the early days of the territory, when Oklahoma was still wild enough that survival required more courage than most people possessed. And she tried not to think about the calendar, about the days ticking away toward the bank's deadline like a clock counting down to execution. On the evening of the 8th day, Cade knocked softly on her door just as the sun was painting the western sky in shades of amber and rose. Lena had been dozing, the book of Wordsworth poems open on her lap, when his voice pulled her back to wakefulness. "Miss Harlow, may I come in?" She straightened quickly, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance, her unbound hair falling loose around her shoulders. "Yes, of course." He entered with the careful movements of a large man trying not to take up too much space, hat in hand as always, his eyes not quite meeting hers. In the week she had spent under his roof, Lena had seen Cade Thornton exactly 4 times. He took his meals alone in his study. He left before dawn and returned after dark. When their paths did cross in the hallway or on the porch, he nodded politely and moved on, maintaining a distance that felt almost deliberate in its consistency. Now, standing in the amber light of late afternoon, he looked tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. There were new lines around his eyes, and his jaw carried the shadow of a beard he had not bothered to shave. "How are you feeling?" he asked, the question formal, almost stilted. "Better? Stronger, doctor. Bright says another week of rest, and I should be able to return home." She hesitated, then added, "I want to thank you again for everything you've done. Your men have worked my fields with more care than I could have managed alone. I'm grateful." Cade nodded, but his expression remained troubled. He moved to the window, looking out at the land his crew had transformed. "They've finished plowing all 160 acres, started planting yesterday. Wheat and corn mostly, with some sorghum on the rocky sections. If the weather holds, you should have a decent harvest come fall." "That's wonderful news." Lena waited, sensing there was more, something heavier he had come here to say. He turned to face her, and she saw genuine anguish in his winter sky eyes. "Lena, there's been a development. I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm when you hear it." Fear spiked through her chest. "What's happened? Is it the baby?" "No, nothing like that. It's about your land, about Clarence Wade." The name alone was enough to make her stomach clench. "What about him?" Cade pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket, his movements slow and reluctant. "He came to see me 3 days ago. Brought this with him. I've been trying to verify its authenticity, but my lawyer confirmed it this morning. I'm sorry, Lena. I'm so sorry." He handed her the paper, and she unfolded it with trembling hands. The legal language was dense and confusing, but certain phrases leaped out with brutal clarity. Promissory note, $300. Victor Harlow, debtor. Clarence Wade, creditor. Payment due upon death of borrower, with 10% annual interest compounded. The date on the note was June 15th, 1883, 10 years ago. Lena read it twice, then a third time, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes were seeing. My father borrowed money from Clarence Wade? According to this document, yes. $300 to purchase seed and equipment after a bad harvest year. The note specifies payment due upon his death, with interest accumulating until then. She did the mathematics quickly, her father's training in practical numbers serving her even through the panic. $300 at 10% interest over 10 years, compounded annually. The total would be staggering, far more than she could ever hope to pay. How much does he claim I owe? Cade's voice was gentle, but the numbers were merciless. $750. He's willing to settle for the land itself, transfer of title in lieu of cash payment. Says it's the compassionate option, given your circumstances. $750. It might as well have been $7 million. Lena would never see that much money in her lifetime. Even if she sold every animal, every piece of equipment, every stick of furniture her father owned, she would not come close. "This can't be real," she whispered. "My father never mentioned owing Clarence anything. He hated debt. He would have told me. Maybe he hoped to outlive Wade. Maybe he thought he'd find a way to pay it off before it came due." Cade moved closer, his expression pained. Or maybe he did pay it, and Wade is lying about it. Hope flared in Lena's chest. "Do you think that's possible?" "I think Clarence Wade is capable of almost anything when it comes to getting what he wants. But proving fraud is difficult without evidence. I've had my lawyer searching for records, asking around town to see if anyone remembers your father making any large payments 10 years ago. So far, we've found nothing." Lena stood abruptly, pacing the small room like a caged animal, one hand pressed to her lower back where the familiar ache had returned. "There has to be something. Papers, receipts, bank records. My father kept meticulous accounts. If he paid this debt, there would be documentation. Then we need to find it. I've given you 8 days, Lena. How many do you have left before the bank's deadline?" She calculated quickly, the numbers a countdown to disaster. 22 days. But if Clarence can claim I owe him $750, he can place a lien on the property immediately. Even if I meet the bank's requirements for productive use, he can still take the land to satisfy the debt. Exactly. Which is why I came here tonight. Cade took a deep breath, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "There's a way to stop him. It's not perfect, and it requires you to trust me in a way you probably shouldn't. But it would work." "What way?" He met her eyes directly for the first time since entering the room, and what she saw there was determination mixed with something that looked almost like fear. "Marry me." The words hung in the air between them, absurd and impossible. Lena actually laughed, a sharp bark of sound with no humor in it. "What?" "If we marry, your property becomes part of a marital estate. Clarence can't place a lien without suing both of us, and I have resources to fight him in court. More importantly, I have lawyers who are very good at finding holes in documents, like that promissory note." Lena shook her head, still trying to process what he was suggesting. "You can't be serious. We barely know each other." "I know you're brave and stubborn and fighting for something that matters. You know I owe your father a debt I can never fully repay. That's more than most marriages start with." "Most marriages start with love, Mr. Thornton." Something flickered across his face, pain and memory intertwining. "And look how well that worked out for me. Margaret and I married young, caught up in romance and passion. We had to learn partnership the hard way, through loss and grief. Maybe starting with honesty and practical need is better than starting with illusions that can't survive reality." Lena pressed both hands to her temples, trying to organize thoughts that scattered like startled birds. "This is insane. Even if I agreed, which I haven't, what would you get out of this arrangement? You'd be taking on a pregnant woman, a child that isn't yours, and a legal battle with one of the most vindictive men in the territory. Why would you do that?" Cade was quiet for a long moment, his gaze returning to the window, to the land beyond that held so much history and promise and threat. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low she had to strain to hear it. "Because this house is too quiet. Has been for 5 years. Rosa worries about me, says I'm turning into a hermit, and she's probably right. I've been living in the past, Lena, surrounded by ghosts and memories. Maybe it's time I built something new." He turned back to her, his expression raw and unguarded. "I'm not asking you to love me. I'm asking you to let me help you in a way that also helps me. A partnership. Nothing more, unless you want it to be." "And what about the child?" Lena's hand moved instinctively to her abdomen. "You'd claim Another man's baby is yours? Yes, legally and in every way that matters. Your son or daughter would bear the Thornton name, inherit everything I have. No questions asked, no strings attached. The generosity of it was staggering, almost incomprehensible. Lena searched his face for signs of ulterior motive, hidden agendas, the catch that surely existed in such an offer. But all she saw was weary sincerity and a loneliness that mirrored her own. "I need to think about this," she said finally. "It's too much, too fast. I can't make this decision right now." "Of course, take whatever time you need. But Lena, understand that Clarence will move quickly. Once he files that lien claim with the county clerk, stopping him becomes much harder. Every day matters." After he left, Lena sank back into her chair and stared at the promissory note until the words blurred together. $750, a sum that might as well be a mountain, insurmountable and implacable. She thought about her father, about Victor Harlow's careful pride and fierce independence. Would he have kept such a debt secret? Or was this document exactly what Cade suspected, a fraud constructed by a patient enemy who had waited years for the perfect moment to strike? Rosa found her there an hour later, tears streaming down her face, the promissory note clutched in one hand. The older woman took in the scene with a single glance and gathered Lena into her arms without a word, rocking her gently while she sobbed out her fear and frustration and desperate uncertainty. "He told you about Wade's claim," Rosa said when the tears finally subsided. Lena nodded against her shoulder. "How did you know?" "Because Cade looked like a man going to war when he came up those stairs, and because Clarence Wade has been circling your land like a vulture since before your father was cold in the ground. This was always coming, mija. The only question was how and when." "Rosa, did my father ever mention owing Clarence money? Any kind of debt at all?" The older woman was quiet, her weathered hands smoothing Lena's hair with maternal gentleness. "Not to me. But Victor was a proud man. He might not have shared such a burden even with friends. Or Clarence is lying. That's also possible. Probable, even. But proving it," Rosa sighed. "That's the trick, isn't it?" Lena pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Cade proposed. Asked me to marry him to protect the land." If Rosa was surprised, she hid it well. "And what did you say?" "That I needed to think. That it was too much, too fast. That I can't possibly accept such an enormous sacrifice from someone who doesn't even love me." Rosa's dark eyes studied her with an intensity that made Lena want to look away. "And is that the only reason? That he doesn't love you? What other reason would there be? Perhaps that you don't love him either, but you're starting to feel something that scares you. Perhaps that accepting his help means admitting you can't do everything alone. Perhaps that marrying Cade Thornton would mean letting go of the last piece of independence you have left." The accuracy of Rosa's observation struck Lena like a physical blow. Yes, she was afraid of obligation and debt, but she was equally afraid of the strange warmth that bloomed in her chest when Cade looked at her with those winter sky eyes, the way her pulse quickened when she heard his voice in the hallway, the traitorous part of her heart that wanted to believe a partnership could become something more. "I don't know him," Lena said weakly. "How can I marry someone I don't know? You know he's honest. You know he keeps his word. You know he's grieving something he lost 5 years ago and hasn't figured out how to live again." Rosa took Lena's hands in hers, squeezing gently. "Sometimes knowing someone's pain is more important than knowing their favorite color or what makes them laugh. The small things come with time. The big things, the character underneath, that's what matters from the start." "And if I say yes, what kind of marriage would it be?" "Whatever kind you both make it. Cade won't force anything you're not ready to give. He's too much of a gentleman for that, too scarred by loss. But he's also lonely, mija. Lonelier than any man should be. You could help each other if you're brave enough to try." After Rosa left, Lena sat alone in the gathering darkness and tried to envision a future that included Cade Thornton as her husband. The word felt strange even in her thoughts, weighted with implications she could barely process. Husband, partner, the father her child would know, even if not the father who had created them. Thomas Birch's face swam up from memory, his easy smile and restless energy. She had cared for him, maybe even loved him in that desperate way of lonely people finding brief connection. But Thomas had never offered her anything permanent, had never promised more than the moment allowed. And now he was gone, dead or simply moved on, and she was carrying his child into an uncertain future. Cade Thornton was offering certainty, security, a name and resources that could protect both her and her baby. All he asked in return was companionship, an end to the silence that had consumed his life since Margaret died. Was that enough foundation for a marriage? Lena thought about the marriages she had witnessed growing up. Her father had never remarried after her mother's death, but she had seen other unions in the territory. Some were love matches that burned bright and consumed themselves. Others were practical arrangements that grew into genuine affection over years of shared struggle. And some remained business transactions, two people occupying the same space without ever truly connecting. Which kind would her marriage to Cade become? She did not know. But as she prepared for bed that night, washing her face in the porcelain basin that had once belonged to Margaret, wearing a nightgown Rosa had altered to fit her expanding figure, Lena found herself thinking about courage and what forms it could take. Running into burning buildings to save strangers was one kind of courage. Her father had possessed that in abundance. But maybe accepting help when you desperately needed it, trusting someone you barely knew with your future and your child's future, choosing vulnerability over the illusion of self-sufficiency, maybe that was courage too. The next morning, Lena woke with her decision made. She found Cade in the barn, mucking out stalls with the kind of focused intensity that suggested he was working off some powerful emotion. He looked up when her shadow fell across the doorway, surprise and something else, something almost like hope, flickering across his features. "You shouldn't be out of bed," he said, setting aside his pitchfork. "Dr. Bright said another week of rest. I needed to talk to you. It couldn't wait." He moved closer, wiping his hands on his work pants, his expression guarded now, braced for rejection. "All right." Lena took a deep breath, one hand resting on her abdomen where the baby had begun its morning acrobatics. "I have conditions. If we do this, if we marry, I need certain things guaranteed." She watched his throat work as he swallowed. "Name them." "My land stays separate. When this is over, when Clarence is defeated or gives up or dies, I want my property to remain mine. My son or daughter inherits what my father built, not your holdings." "Agreed. I'll have the papers drawn up to ensure it's legally protected. And we maintain separate bedrooms. This is a partnership, not a real marriage. Not unless," she faltered, heat rising in her cheeks, "not unless both of us want it to be." Something in his eyes softened, a tension she had not even realized was there, loosening slightly. "Of course, I would never expect or demand anything you're not ready to give freely. Then yes, I'll marry you." "Marry? For the land, for the baby, for whatever practical reasons make this necessary. But Cade, I need you to understand something." "What's that?" "I can't be, Margaret. I won't even try. If you're looking for a replacement for what you lost, you'll be disappointed." Pain crossed his face, sharp and immediate, but he did not look away. "I'm not asking you to be Margaret. I'm asking you to be Lena, the woman who refused my help even when she was desperate. The woman who would rather collapse in a field than admit she needed assistance. The woman brave enough to raise a child alone in a territory that eats the weak alive." He paused, then added quietly, "I don't want a ghost, Lena. I want a partner, someone real, someone who can help me remember how to be alive instead of just surviving." The raw honesty in his words took her breath away. For the first time since entering this barn, Lena saw past Cade Thornton's careful control to the lonely, grieving man underneath. A man who had been marking time for 5 years, going through the motions of living without actually experiencing life. Maybe Rosa was right. Maybe they could help each other. "All right," she said softly. "Let's do this before I lose my nerve." A smile ghosted across Cade's face, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "I'll send word to Reverend Morrison. We can be married tomorrow if you're willing. The sooner we make this legal, the sooner we can start fighting Clarence's claim." Tomorrow. Lena's stomach dropped at the speed of it all, the way her life was changing in the space of a single conversation. But Cade was right about urgency. Every day they waited was another day for Clarence to solidify his position, to make his fraudulent claim harder to contest. "Tomorrow, then," she agreed, and sealed her fate with two words that felt both terrifying and inevitable. The wedding preparations were minimal, befitting the practical nature of the union. Rosa insisted on altering one of her own good dresses for Lena to wear, a deep blue cotton that brought out the color in her eyes. Dr. Bright was summoned to serve as witness, along with Miguel and two of Cade's ranch hands who spoke limited English but understood the gravity of what was happening. Reverend Morrison arrived just after noon the following day, a kindly man in his 60s who had presided over most of the significant ceremonies in Cedar Ridge for the past 20 years. If he was surprised by the rushed nature of the wedding or the visible condition of the bride, he hid it well. They gathered in the front parlor of the Thornton Ranch, a room Lena had never entered before. It was formally decorated in the Victorian style, with heavy furniture and dark wallpaper that suggested Margaret's touch. A portrait hung over the fireplace, a beautiful woman with golden hair and gentle eyes, looking down at them with an expression Lena could not quite read. Approval? Sorrow? Blessing? Cade stood near the window in a suit that looked like it had not been worn in years, his dark hair slicked back, his jaw freshly shaved. He looked uncomfortable in the formal clothing, his broad shoulders straining against the jacket, but his eyes, when they met Lena's, held steady determination. Reverend Morrison opened his worn Bible and began the familiar ceremony, words that had joined countless couples in bonds meant to last until death. Lena listened as if from a great distance, her hands cold, despite the warmth of the afternoon, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Do you, Cade Thornton, take Lena Harlow to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do." His voice was steady, no hesitation, no doubt. "And do you, Lena Harlow, take Cade Thornton to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" The moment stretched, suspended between possibility and commitment. Lena thought about her father, about Thomas, about the child growing inside her, who deserved stability and security. She thought about Cade's lonely eyes and Rosa's gentle wisdom and the land her father had died trying to protect. "I do," she said, and felt the axis of her world shift. Cade produced a ring, simple gold, that caught the afternoon light. He slid it onto her finger with careful precision, his hands warm and slightly rough against hers. The metal felt foreign, a weight she would have to grow accustomed to. "By the power vested in me by the Oklahoma Territory, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Cade, you may kiss your bride." Cade's eyes asked permission even as he leaned forward, giving her every opportunity to turn away. But Lena held still as his lips brushed hers, a kiss so gentle and brief it barely qualified as contact. Yet something sparked in that moment of connection, electricity jumping between two people who had just bound their futures together with words and promises they barely understood. When he pulled back, his expression was unreadable, but Lena thought she saw color rising in his cheeks. Rosa produced champagne she had been saving for a special occasion, and they toasted the new union with forced cheer, while Reverend Morrison beamed and Dr. Bright looked on with grandfatherly approval. The Mexican ranch hands clapped and called out blessings in Spanish, their enthusiasm genuine even if the circumstances were unusual. Through it all, Lena felt disconnected from her own body, watching the scene as if from outside herself. That woman in the blue dress accepting congratulations, that was her. That tall man with the winter sky eyes standing protectively at her side, that was her husband now. The word felt impossible even in her thoughts. After the ceremony, after the well-wishers had departed and Rosa had cleaned up the minimal celebration, Lena found herself alone with Cade for the first time as his wife. They stood awkwardly in the front hallway, the house settling into evening quiet around them. "Your room is ready," Cade said finally, his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed somewhere over her left shoulder. "Same one you've been using. I moved your things from your father's house earlier this week." Rosa organized everything. "Thank you. That was thoughtful. If you need anything, my room is at the end of the hall. Just knock." The careful distance in his words was both reassuring and oddly disappointing. This was what she had asked for: separate bedrooms and partnership without pressure. So why did part of her feel rejected by his scrupulous respect for their agreement? "Cade," she said as he turned to go, "what happens now? With Clarence, I mean. Do we just wait for him to make his next move?" He faced her again, and she saw the strategist behind the grieving widower, the man who had built a successful ranch through intelligence and careful planning. "Tomorrow I file our marriage certificate with the county clerk. I also have my lawyer, Mrs. Beatrice Lowell, prepare a formal challenge to Wade's promissory note. We'll demand he produce evidence of the original transaction, witnesses if they exist, any documentation beyond that single piece of paper. Will that stop him? It will slow him down, force him to show his hand. And while he's scrambling to justify his claim, we'll be searching for proof that your father paid the debt. Someone must remember something, Lena. Money doesn't change hands in a territory this small without people noticing." She nodded, drawing strength from his confidence, even as doubt gnawed at her. "And if we can't find proof? If Clarence's claim holds up?" Cade's expression hardened, and for the first time Lena glimpsed the steel underneath his gentlemanly exterior. "Then we fight him in court with every resource I have. Drag it out until he's spent more money on lawyers than the land is worth. Make him regret the day he decided to target Victor Harlow's daughter." The fierce protectiveness in his voice sent warmth spreading through her chest. This man who had been a stranger 2 weeks ago was now ready to go to war on her behalf, to spend his fortune and reputation defending land that was not even his. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why fight so hard for me?" Cade was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Because you remind me that there are still things worth fighting for. Because your father saved the woman I loved when I couldn't. Because—" he paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "Because when I look at you, Lena, I see someone who refuses to give up no matter how impossible the odds. That kind of courage deserves protection, deserves partnership." Before she could respond, before she could process the layered meanings in his confession, a sharp knock at the front door shattered the moment. Cade frowned, moving to answer it while Lena remained frozen in the hallway, her new ring heavy on her finger. The voice that drifted back was familiar and unwelcome. Clarence Wade, speaking with the oily politeness that barely concealed his malice. "Good evening, Thornton. I heard congratulations are in order. You and Miss Harlow, or should I say Mrs. Thornton now, tied the knot today. News travels fast." Cade's voice was arctic, barely civil. "In a territory this size, everything travels fast. I wanted to stop by and offer my best wishes, also to make sure you understood the situation regarding the promissory note." Lena moved closer, drawn by morbid curiosity and the need to face her enemy directly. Clarence stood on the porch in his expensive suit, his pale eyes gleaming with satisfaction that made her skin crawl. "We understand perfectly," Cade said. "My lawyer will be contesting your claim first thing Monday morning. I suggest you prepare to provide substantial evidence of this alleged debt." Clarence's smile never wavered. "Oh, I have evidence, more than enough to satisfy any court. But I'm not an unreasonable man, Thornton. I'm willing to negotiate. Perhaps we could come to some arrangement that would spare everyone the ugliness of litigation." "I'm not interested in your arrangements." Not even if I told you there's more at stake here than a simple debt? Clarence's gaze shifted to Lena, lingering on her condition with an expression that made her want to step back into the shadows. There are things about Victor Harlow that his daughter doesn't know, secrets that might change how she feels about defending his precious legacy. Lena found her voice, stepping forward to stand beside Cade. My father was a good man. Whatever lies you're about to tell won't change that. Lies? My dear Mrs. Thornton, I'm talking about truth. Uncomfortable, messy truth that Victor kept hidden for very good reasons. Clarence reached into his jacket and produced an envelope, yellowed with age. But perhaps you should hear it from him directly. A letter he wrote to me in 1883, around the time he borrowed that $300. Makes for fascinating reading. He held out the envelope, and Lena took it with trembling hands despite every instinct, screaming not to trust anything this man offered. The handwriting on the outside was her father's. She recognized it immediately. Victor's careful script, each letter formed with the precision of someone who had learned to write later in life. I'll leave you to read that in private, Clarence said, his smile widening. We can discuss terms after you've had time to digest its contents. I think you'll find I'm being quite generous, all things considered. Good evening to you both. He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Lena clutching the envelope like it might explode in her hands. Cade gently guided her back inside, closing the door against the gathering darkness. You don't have to read it. Whatever's in there, Clarence obviously wants you to see it, which means it's probably designed to hurt you. Then I need to know what ammunition he has. Lena broke the seal with fingers that would not stop shaking, unfolding paper that felt brittle with age. The letter was short, written in her father's careful hand, dated June 1883, as Clarence had claimed. Clarence, I am writing to acknowledge the loan of $300 you provided today. I understand the terms as we discussed them, payment due upon my death with 10% interest annually. I also understand and accept the additional condition that I never speak of the reason for this loan to my daughter or anyone else in the territory. Some secrets are better left buried. You have my word that what happened in 1873 will remain between us. Victor Harlow. Lena read it 3 times, her mind reeling. What happened in 1873? The year of the Prairie Fire. The year her mother died, giving birth to her. What does this mean? She whispered, looking up at Cade with eyes that burned with unshed tears. What happened in 1873 that my father felt he needed to keep secret? Cade's expression was grim, his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. I don't know, but whatever it is, Clarence is using it as leverage, trying to make you doubt your father, weaken your resolve to fight for the land. It's working. Lena sank onto the settee, the letter falling from her nerveless fingers. All these years, I thought I knew him, thought he told me everything that mattered, but he borrowed money from Clarence Wade and never mentioned it. Agreed to keep some secret about 1873, the year my mother died. What if everything I believed about him was wrong? Or what if he was protecting you from something? Cade knelt in front of her, his hands covering hers where they twisted in her lap. Lena, your father saved my wife from a burning building. He took in a motherless child and raised her alone in a territory that chewed up strong men and spit them out. Whatever this secret is, whatever happened in 1873, it doesn't erase the man he was. She wanted to believe him, needed to believe him, but doubt had taken root in her chest, growing tendrils of uncertainty that choked her conviction. Rosa appeared in the doorway, took one look at Lena's face, and immediately moved into action. Mija, you need rest. This has been too much excitement for one day. Come, let me help you upstairs. Lena allowed herself to be led away, her mind churning with questions that had no answers. Behind her, she heard Cade pick up the letter, heard his sharp intake of breath as he read it. That night, lying in Margaret's bed wearing Margaret's nightgown and Margaret's wedding ring on a chain around her neck because it had felt wrong to remove it immediately, Lena stared at the ceiling and tried to reconcile the father she remembered with the man who kept secrets significant enough to require loans in silence. What happened in 1873, and why had Clarence Wade waited 10 years to use that knowledge as a weapon? Sleep came eventually, but it brought dreams of fire and smoke, of voices crying out in languages she could not understand, of her father's face twisted with grief and guilt as he handed her to strangers and walked away into flames that consumed everything. She woke gasping, tears streaming down her face, one hand pressed to her abdomen where the baby kicked in agitation, responding to her distress. A soft knock at the door made her start. "Lena, are you all right? I heard you cry out." Cade's voice, rough with sleep and concern. "I'm fine," she called back, her voice breaking on the words. "Just a bad dream." Silence from the hallway. Then, "May I come in? Just to talk. You don't have to be alone with this." She should say no, should maintain the careful boundaries they had established. But the loneliness of her thoughts was crushing, and the need for human connection, for someone who might understand the weight of secrets and loss, was overwhelming. "Yes," she said quietly. "Please." The door opened, and Cade entered wearing a hastily donned shirt over his nightclothes, his hair disheveled from sleep. He settled into the chair by the window, maintaining that careful distance even as he offered the comfort of presence. "Tell me about him," Cade said softly. "Your father, not the secrets, not the doubts. Tell me about the man you knew." And so Lena talked, her voice breaking and recovering and breaking again, painting a picture of Victor Harlow through stories and memories, the way he sang old Spanish songs while working, learned from the men he labored beside, how he taught her to read using the Bible and agricultural almanacs, the only books they owned, his habit of talking to the horses like they were people, explaining his plans and asking their opinions, the gentleness of his calloused hands when he braided her hair, the fierce protection in his eyes when anyone treated her with disrespect because of her heritage. Cade listened without interruption, and when she finally fell silent, exhausted by grief and catharsis, he spoke with quiet conviction. "That man, the one you just described, he loved you. Whatever this secret is, whatever happened in 1873, it doesn't change that he spent every day of your life trying to give you something better. Don't let Clarence Wade poison those memories. Don't give him that power." "But what if the secret is terrible? What if my father did something unforgivable?" "Then we face it together. Whatever truth is buried in 1873, we'll find it, and we'll decide together what it means and how to move forward." He stood, moving to the door but pausing before leaving. "You're not alone anymore, Lena. You have a partner now, for better or worse, remember?" After he left, Lena lay in the darkness and turned his words over in her mind. For better or worse. She had promised that just hours ago, standing in front of Reverend Morrison and witnesses, binding herself to a man she barely knew. But maybe Cade was right. Maybe partnership meant facing the hard truths together, sharing the burden of doubt and fear instead of carrying it alone. The baby shifted restlessly inside her, and Lena placed both hands on her swollen abdomen, whispering promises into the dark. "Whatever happened in 1873, whatever secrets your grandfather kept, we'll figure it out, and we'll make sure you grow up knowing the good man he was, not just the mysteries he left behind." Outside, the Oklahoma night held its breath, waiting to see what morning would bring and what truths would emerge when desperate people started digging into a past that some had worked very hard to keep buried. 2 weeks passed in a strange new rhythm that Lena was still learning to navigate. Dr. Bright had finally pronounced her well enough to move about the ranch freely, though he insisted she avoid heavy labor for at least another month. Her body had recovered from the collapse. The baby was growing strong and active, but the emotional landscape of her new life remained uncertain terrain. Being Cade Thornton's wife was nothing like she had imagined marriage would be, back when she still allowed herself such fantasies. They maintained separate bedrooms as agreed, separate routines that intersected at carefully orchestrated moments. Breakfast together at the large dining table, making stilted conversation about weather and cattle prices, while Rosa bustled around serving food and shooting them meaningful looks. Dinner in the same fashion, slightly less awkward as they found safer topics to discuss. But it was the small, unexpected moments of connection that confused Lena most. The way Cade's hand would steady her elbow when she navigated the stairs. How he had begun reading aloud to her in the evenings, continuing a habit Margaret had apparently enjoyed, his deep voice bringing poetry and adventure stories to life. The morning she woke to find he had commissioned a carpenter to build a cradle and spent his afternoons in the barn workshop carving delicate patterns into the wood. These gestures felt like more than partnership. They felt like the tentative beginnings of something neither of them had named or acknowledged. Meanwhile, the legal battle with Clarence Wade had begun in earnest. Beatrice Lowell, Cade's lawyer, had filed formal challenges to the promissory note, demanding that Clarence provide documentation beyond the single piece of paper. Witnesses to the original transaction, bank records showing the loan dispersal, any evidence that Victor Harlow had actually received $300 in 1883. Clarence had responded with his own battery of legal maneuvers, requesting time extensions, claiming that records from 20 years ago were difficult to locate, maintaining an air of injured innocence that made Lena want to scream. And through it all, that letter from her father haunted her. What happened in 1873 will remain between us. Lena had spent hours searching through her father's papers, looking for any clue about the mysterious event that required such secrecy. She found meticulous records of every seed purchase, every cattle sale, every mundane transaction of frontier life. But nothing about 1873 except a brief notation in Victor's journal. Ayanna died today. God forgive me. Ayanna, her mother, the Apache woman who had given Lena life and died in the process. On the 15th day of her marriage, while Cade was out checking fences on the northern boundary of his land, Rosa found Lena in the kitchen staring at that journal entry for the 100th time. "Mija, you're going to worry yourself sick." Rosa took the journal gently from her hands and closed it. "Some questions don't have answers we can find in old books." "Then where do I find them? Clarence obviously knows something about my mother's death. Something significant enough that my father agreed to keep it secret for 20 years. Rosa was quiet for a long moment, her weathered hands folded on the table between them. Finally, she sighed deeply. "There are things I know, Lena, things your father told me in confidence before he died, things I promised never to share unless absolutely necessary." Lena's heart began to race. "Tell me, please, Rosa. I need to understand." "Are you sure? Some truths are harder to live with than mysteries." "I'm sure." Rosa stood and poured them both coffee, the ritual giving her time to organize thoughts she had clearly kept buried for years. When she finally sat back down, her dark eyes were gentle but resolute. "Your mother, Ayanna, she was not just some random Apache woman your father met and married. She worked for the Thorntons, for Margaret and Cade, back when they were newly married and building this ranch." The revelation hit Lena like a physical blow. "My mother worked here? In this house?" "Yes, she was Margaret's personal attendant, helped with cooking and cleaning. Your mother was educated, spoke perfect English alongside Apache and some Spanish. She and Margaret became genuine friends, unusual for that time and place." "And my father? How did he meet her?" "Victor was working as a ranch hand here too. That's how Cade knew him, long before the fire. Your parents fell in love despite the social barriers, despite the danger it posed to them both. When Ayanna got pregnant, they knew they couldn't stay. Mixed-race relationships were barely tolerated, and a baby would have made them targets." Lena felt tears burning in her eyes. "So they left? Ran away together?" "They were planning to. Victor had saved enough money to homestead his own piece of land, far enough from the Thornton ranch that they could live quietly. But then the fire happened." Rosa paused, her own eyes distant with memory. "May 14th, 1873. A prairie fire started by lightning, spread fast across the grasslands. It reached the Thornton property before anyone could organize a proper defense. Margaret was 7 months pregnant, trapped in the main house when the flames surrounded it. Ayanna was 8 months along with you. And my father saved them both?" He tried. Victor ran into that burning building and carried Margaret out first because she was unconscious from the smoke. Cade was on the other side of the property, trying to save the livestock, didn't even know his wife was in danger until Victor brought her out. Lena waited, dread building in her chest as Rosa's expression grew pained. By the time Victor went back for Ayanna, the roof was starting to collapse. He found her in Margaret's room, trying to save some of her mistress's belongings. The smoke inhalation, the stress, the fear, it all triggered early labor. Victor got her out, but barely. They made it to the barn before the baby started coming, and my mother died in childbirth. Yes and no. Rosa took Lena's hands in hers, squeezing gently. Ayanna delivered you safely. You were small but healthy, crying loud enough to wake the dead. But the smoke damage to her lungs, combined with the strain of early labor, it was too much. She lived long enough to hold you, to name you, to make Victor promise he would raise you to be strong and brave. Then she died in his arms, while the world burned around them. The image was almost too much to bear. Lena pressed both hands to her mouth, trying to hold back the sobs that wanted to tear free. Her mother dying, while everything burned, trusting a man she loved to protect the daughter she would never know. But what about Margaret? Lena managed to ask. Did she lose her baby? Rosa's expression grew complicated, layers of old pain and carefully kept secrets. Margaret miscarried 2 months later. The doctor said the trauma from the fire caused it, that her body went into shock and couldn't sustain the pregnancy. She was devastated, blamed herself for surviving when Ayanna didn't, for living while her friend died, saving her belongings. So Margaret knew my mother? They were friends? Close friends. The kind that transcended the social barriers of the time. Margaret was heartbroken when Ayanna died. She wanted to adopt you, raise you as her own daughter. She begged Cade to let her, said it was the least she could do to honor Ayanna's sacrifice. Lena felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. Then why didn't she? Why did my father raise me instead? Rosa's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Because Clarence Wade threatened to destroy them all if they tried. The name sent ice through Lena's veins. What does Clarence have to do with this? Clarence owned the land adjacent to the Thornton Ranch back then. He saw what happened during the fire, saw Victor carry Margaret out, saw him go back for Ayanna. And Clarence, being the snake he is, he saw opportunity. Rosa's face hardened with disgust. He went to Cade 3 days after the fire and made his position clear. If the Thorntons tried to adopt a half-Apache baby, if they publicly claimed you as their own, Clarence would spread stories that Victor and Ayanna had been engaged in an illicit affair right under Cade and Margaret's noses, that Margaret's miscarriage was divine punishment for harboring sinners, that the Thorntons were race traitors who deserved social and economic ruin. That's monstrous. That's Clarence Wade. He's been a cancer in this territory for decades, using fear and prejudice as weapons. Rosa's grip tightened on Lena's hands. Cade and Margaret were young. They'd just lost a baby. Their ranch was still vulnerable. They couldn't risk the scandal Clarence threatened. So, they made an impossible choice. They let my father take me. Victor insisted on it, said he'd homestead far enough away that the connection wouldn't be obvious, that he'd raise you to know your heritage, to be proud of both your parents. Margaret gave him money, resources, everything he needed to make a fresh start. And Clarence, satisfied that he'd separated you from the Thorntons, loaned Victor $300 with that poisonous promissory note attached. The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture both heartbreaking and enraging. Clarence wanted leverage, something to hold over my father forever. Exactly. And the secret clause in that loan, the one requiring Victor never speak of what happened in 1873, that was Clarence ensuring none of them could ever expose his blackmail without destroying their own reputations. Lena stood abruptly, pacing the kitchen with restless energy despite her condition. So my father paid Clarence $300 for the privilege of being blackmailed, and spent 20 years keeping that secret to protect the Thorntons, to protect me from the scandal Clarence threatened. That's why I'm telling you now, because you need to understand what kind of man Victor was and what kind of monster Clarence is. Your father wasn't hiding something shameful. He was protecting everyone he loved from a predator who would have destroyed them all. Does Cade know about this, about my mother working here, about Margaret wanting to adopt me? Rosa shook her head slowly. Margaret never told him the full story. She died 5 years ago, still carrying that guilt, still wishing she'd been brave enough to fight for you. Cade knows pieces, knows Margaret was friends with an Apache woman who died in the fire. But he doesn't know that woman was your mother, doesn't know you were the baby Margaret wanted to adopt. The weight of this knowledge was staggering. Lena had married a man who, 2 decades ago, could have been her father, who had lost a child the same day she was born, who had no idea that the pregnant woman he'd just wed was connected to his own tragedy in ways neither of them had understood. "I have to tell him," Lena said. "He deserves to know the truth." "Are you sure? Once you tell him, everything changes. He'll see you differently, Lena. You won't just be the woman he married to protect. You'll be a living reminder of everything he lost." "I'm already a reminder. I'm living in Margaret's room, wearing her hospitality, raising a child in her house. Adding truth to that equation can't make it worse." But even as she said it, Lena wondered if that was naive. Would Cade resent her for being the child Margaret wanted but couldn't have? Would knowing her true connection to his past make their fragile partnership stronger or shatter it completely? She found him that evening in the barn workshop, carefully sanding the cradle he had been building for weeks. The wood was beautiful, oak that glowed golden in the lamplight, carved with intricate patterns of roses and vines. It was almost finished, a masterpiece of patient craftsmanship and quiet devotion. He looked up when her shadow fell across the doorway, a smile touching his lips before concern replaced it. "You shouldn't be out here. The sawdust isn't good for breathing." "I need to talk to you. It's important." Something in her tone made him set down his tools immediately, giving her his full attention. "What's wrong?" Lena took a deep breath, steeling herself for what came next. "Rosa told me something today, about 1873, about my mother and Margaret." She watched his expression shift from curiosity to wariness. "What about them?" "My mother's name was Ayanna. She worked here, as Margaret's attendant. They were friends." Cade went very still, his eyes searching her face with growing intensity. "Ayanna, the woman who died in the fire giving birth to a daughter." "Yes, the daughter was me, Cade. I'm the baby my mother died delivering, the child Margaret wanted to adopt." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. Cade's face went through a complicated series of expressions, shock giving way to understanding to something that looked almost like grief. "You're telling me," he said slowly, his voice rough, "that you're the child Margaret mourned for 20 years? The baby she talked about in her journal, the one she felt she abandoned?" "Rosa says Margaret wanted to adopt me, but Clarence Wade threatened to destroy your family with scandal if you tried. So my father took me and homesteaded far enough away that the connection wouldn't be obvious." Cade sank onto the workbench, his hands gripping the edge hard enough that his knuckles went white. "All this time, you've been here, in this territory, and I never knew. Margaret never told me the whole truth." "Maybe she was trying to protect you, or maybe the pain was too great to speak about." He laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. "So I've been married to you for 2 weeks, working beside you, building this cradle for your child, and only now finding out that 23 years ago I almost became your father, that you're the daughter Margaret wept over losing. I'm sorry, I didn't know either until today." Cade stood abruptly, pacing the small workshop with caged energy. "Don't apologize. This isn't your fault. It's Clarence's poison reaching across decades, destroying lives he never even touched directly." He turned to face her, his winter sky eyes bright with unshed tears. "Does it bother you, knowing what might have been?" Lena thought carefully before answering. "I don't know. Part of me wonders what kind of life I would have had growing up here, with resources and education and social standing. But the man Victor Harlow was, the way he raised me to be strong and independent, I can't regret that. He was a good father, Cade, even if he came to that role through tragedy. I know he was. I saw it in the way you talk about him, the way you fight for his legacy. Cade moved closer, and Lena saw the exact moment his perspective shifted, when she stopped being just his wife and became the ghost of what might have been. God, you even look like her. I never noticed before, but you have Ayanna's eyes, the shape of her face. You remember her that well? She worked in my house for 3 years. Of course I remember her. She was kind, capable, made Margaret laugh when grief tried to consume her after the first miscarriage. His hand reached out, almost touching Lena's face before dropping back to his side. Margaret would be so happy to know you survived, that Victor raised you well. She carried the guilt of your separation until the day she died. Then we both have ghosts we're living with, Lena said softly. The question is whether knowing the truth makes us closer or pushes us apart. Cade was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. I think, he said finally, it makes everything more complicated, but also more honest. I married you thinking I was helping a stranger in need. Now I find out you're connected to my past in ways I never imagined. That changes things. How? I don't know yet. Give me time to process it. He turned back to the cradle, running his fingers along the carved roses. But Lena, understand this. Whatever history connects us, whatever might-have-beens haunt our marriage, you're not Margaret's replacement daughter. You're your own person. Victor's daughter, the woman brave enough to plow fields while pregnant. My wife, for better or worse. The words were both reassuring and distancing, creating space even as they acknowledged connection. Lena understood what he was doing, protecting both of them from the weight of too much shared history, too many layers of obligation and guilt. Thank you for saying that. I mean it. And Lena, tomorrow we're going to use this information against Clarence. If he threatened blackmail in 1873, if he forced your father into that poisonous loan agreement through coercion, that changes the legal standing of his claim. Mrs. Lowell needs to know everything. Lena nodded, relief flooding through her that he saw the strategic value in the revelation rather than just the emotional complexity. Will it be enough to stop him? I don't know. But it's leverage we didn't have before. And leverage is power, especially against a man who's built his life on keeping other people's secrets. That night, Lena lay in bed and thought about the strange web of fate that had brought her to this moment. Born in a barn during a fire, raised by a man protecting her from the scandal of her own existence, married to someone who might have been her father in another version of reality. The baby kicked, strong and insistent, reminding her that the past was just prologue. What mattered now was the future they would build, the child she would raise, the partnership she and Cade were forging from necessity and slowly growing respect. Through the walls, she could hear Cade moving around in his room, restless with the same thoughts that kept her awake. Tomorrow they would turn this revelation into ammunition against Clarence Wade. Tomorrow they would begin unraveling secrets that had poisoned lives for 2 decades. But tonight, they were just 2 people bound by promises and history, learning to navigate a marriage neither of them had anticipated, carrying ghosts neither of them could quite lay to rest. The Oklahoma night held its secrets close, waiting to see what morning would bring and what price Clarence Wade would demand for the truth he had used as a weapon for far too long. 4 weeks had passed since Lena learned the truth about her mother, and in that time, the world had shifted in ways both subtle and seismic. The legal battle with Clarence Wade had escalated into open warfare, with Mrs. Beatrice Lowell filing motions and counterclaims that turned the quiet Cedar Ridge courthouse into a battleground of paper and precedent. Cade had taken Rose's testimony, had it notarized and submitted as evidence that Clarence's promissory note was obtained through blackmail and coercion. He had hired investigators from Guthrie to track down anyone who might remember the events of 1873, who could testify to the threats Clarence had made, the lives he had manipulated. What they found was a pattern stretching back decades. 4 other families driven from their land through similar schemes, loans with impossible terms, secrets weaponized, legal documents that smelled of fraud but were just clean enough to pass cursory inspection. Clarence Wade had built his empire on the systematic destruction of people who could not fight back. But Lena Thornton, formerly Harlow, was not alone anymore, and that made all the difference. The trial was set for the first Monday in July in the Cedar Ridge courthouse that doubled as a town hall and occasional church. Judge Nathan Harrison, a stern man of 65, who had presided over territorial justice for 20 years, would hear arguments from both sides and render judgment on whether Clarence's claim held legal merit. The stakes were absolute. If Clarence won, Lena's land would be forfeit to satisfy the debt, and everything Victor Harlow had died protecting would belong to the man who had spent 2 decades waiting to take it. If they won, the promissory note would be voided, and Clarence's carefully constructed web of blackmail would begin to unravel. Lena woke on the morning of the trial with her heart hammering against her ribs and the baby pressing urgently against her bladder. 8.5 months pregnant now, she moved with the careful deliberation of someone carrying precious cargo through treacherous terrain. Dr. Bright had warned her against the stress of attending the trial, had suggested she remain at the ranch and let Cade handle the legal proceedings. She had refused with a vehemence that surprised them both. This was her father's legacy, her land, her fight. She would see it through to the end, even if that meant sitting in an uncomfortable courtroom chair while her body reminded her constantly that another battle was approaching, one far more intimate and inevitable. Rosa helped her dress in the best clothing they could find that still fit her changing shape, a dark green dress that Cade had purchased from the dressmaker in town specifically for this occasion. It was expensive, well-made, designed to announce that Lena Thornton was not some desperate widow scrambling for scraps, but the wife of one of the territory's most successful ranchers. Armor, Lena thought as Rosa fastened the buttons. They were going to war, and clothing was part of the strategy. Cade waited downstairs, looking uncomfortable in a formal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and made him seem even more imposing than usual. His hair was slicked back, his jaw freshly shaved, but his eyes held the same winter sky intensity that Lena had come to recognize as his battle face. The expression of a man who would not yield, would not compromise, would burn the world down before admitting defeat. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly, as she descended the stairs with careful steps. "I can represent us both. No one would think less of you for staying home in your condition. I would think less of me." Lena accepted his offered arm, grateful for the stability as another wave of pressure moved through her abdomen. Not contractions, Dr. Bright had explained, just Braxton Hicks practice runs as her body prepared for the work ahead. "My father fought Clarence for 20 years. The least I can do is show up for the final round." Something shifted in Cade's expression, pride mixing with concern. "Then let's go finish what Victor started." The ride to Cedar Ridge took 40 minutes, every bump and jolt of the wagon sending discomfort radiating through Lena's lower back. Cade drove with uncharacteristic caution, guiding the horses around the worst ruts, his attention divided between the road and surreptitious glances at her face to gauge her comfort level. "I'm fine," Lena said for the 4th time. "The baby's fine. Stop looking at me like I might shatter. You're 8.5 months pregnant and about to face down a man who's been trying to destroy your family for decades. Forgive me if I'm a little concerned." "Concerned is fine. Hovering is irritating." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Noted. I'll try to confine my hovering to socially acceptable levels." They arrived at the courthouse to find a crowd already gathering. News of the trial had spread through the territory like wildfire, drawing spectators from surrounding communities who wanted to witness the showdown between Clarence Wade and the Thorntons. Lena recognized faces from church, from the general store, neighbors she had not seen since her father's funeral. Some looked sympathetic, others merely curious. A few were expressions of barely concealed satisfaction, people who had always resented Victor Harlow's success and would enjoy watching his daughter lose everything. Mrs. Beatrice Lowell met them at the courthouse steps. She was a woman in her 50s, tall and angular, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. She had fought her way into the legal profession when women lawyers were barely tolerated, and her reputation for ruthless competence was legendary throughout Oklahoma Territory. Mr. and Mrs. Thornton, her handshake was firm, professional. "Are you ready for this?" "As ready as we'll ever be," Cade replied. "Good, because Clarence has brought reinforcements." She gestured toward a carriage pulling up across the street, where Clarence Wade emerged in an expensive suit that probably cost more than most families in Cedar Ridge earned in a year. Behind him came a man Lena did not recognize, carrying a leather briefcase that bulged with documents. "Who's that?" Lena asked. "Dutch Keller, lawyer from Oklahoma City, one of the best in the territory when it comes to contract law." Mrs. Lowell's expression was grim. "Clarence is taking this seriously." "So are we," Cade said, his hand finding Lena's and squeezing gently. "Let's go show him what a mistake looks like." The courtroom was already packed when they entered, every bench filled with spectators eager for drama. Judge Harrison sat at the front, his weathered face impassive as he reviewed documents spread before him. He looked up when Lena and Cade entered, his gaze lingering on her condition for a moment before returning to his papers. They took their seats at the plaintiff's table, Mrs. Lowell arranging her own documents with meticulous precision. Across the aisle, Clarence Wade settled into his chair with the satisfied air of a man who had already won, Dutch Keller beside him radiating expensive confidence. Judge Harrison banged his gavel, and the room fell silent. "This court is now in session. We're here to adjudicate the matter of Clarence Wade versus the estate of Victor Harlow regarding collection of a debt allegedly owed per promissory note dated June 1883. Mr. Keller, you may present your opening argument." Dutch Keller stood, his movements smooth and practiced. He was a man built for courtrooms, with a voice that carried authority and a presence that commanded attention. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter of contract law. My client, Mr. Clarence Wade, extended a loan of $300 to Victor Harlow in June of 1883. The terms were clear and documented. Payment due upon Mr. Harlow's death, with 10% annual interest compounded. Mr. Harlow has now been deceased for approximately 3 months. The debt has come due. My client is simply seeking to collect what is legally owed." He produced the promissory note, walking it up to the judge's bench with theatrical precision. "You'll see, Mr. Harlow's signature is clear and unambiguous. The terms are stated plainly. There is no dispute about the validity of this document." Judge Harrison examined the note carefully, his expression revealing nothing. "Mrs. Lowell, your response?" Beatrice Lowell rose with equal theatrical flair, but her performance was underscored with genuine anger. "Your Honor, what Mr. Keller conveniently fails to mention is the context in which this promissory note was obtained. This was not a simple business transaction between equals. This was extortion, blackmail dressed up in legal language to give it the appearance of legitimacy." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Clarence's satisfied expression faltered slightly. "Those are serious allegations, Mrs. Lowell," Judge Harrison said. "I trust you have evidence to support them." "We do, Your Honor. We have testimony from multiple witnesses that will demonstrate Mr. Wade obtained this note through threats and coercion. We have documentation showing a pattern of similar behavior spanning 2 decades. And we have evidence that Victor Harlow, in fact, paid this debt in full 8 years ago, a payment Mr. Wade has deliberately concealed." Now Clarence's expression shifted to genuine alarm. He leaned over to whisper urgently to Dutch Keller, who stood again with forced calm. "Your Honor, these are desperate claims from desperate people trying to avoid a legitimate debt. We're prepared to demonstrate beyond any doubt that no such payment was ever made. Then let's proceed. Judge Harrison settled back in his chair. Mr. Keller, present your case. The next 2 hours were a master class in legal maneuvering. Dutch Keller walked the court through the promissory note line by line, establishing its validity, demonstrating Victor Harlow's signature matched other verified documents. He called witnesses who testified to seeing Victor and Clarence conduct business together over the years, suggesting a relationship that would support the existence of a loan. But he avoided entirely the question of how that loan came to be, the circumstances surrounding it, the pressure that might have forced Victor's hand. When Mrs. Lowell's turn came, she started with Rosa Mendoza. Rosa took the stand with quiet dignity, her hands folded in her lap, her dark eyes steady as she faced the courtroom. Mrs. Lowell guided her through the events of 1873 with gentle precision, establishing Rosa's presence at the Thornton Ranch, her friendship with both Victor Harlow and Margaret Thornton, her first-hand knowledge of what happened during and after the fire. Mrs. Mendoza, can you tell the court what Clarence Wade did in the days following the Prairie Fire? Rosa's voice was clear, carrying across the silent courtroom. He came to see Mr. Cade Thornton and Mrs. Margaret Thornton. I was in the next room cleaning, and I heard the conversation through the door. And what did you hear? Mr. Wade told them that if they tried to adopt the baby, Ayanna's baby, he would spread stories all over the territory. That he would say Victor Harlow and Ayanna had been carrying on an affair right under their noses. That Margaret's miscarriage was God's punishment for harboring sinners, that he would destroy their reputation and their business. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Lena felt Cade's hand tighten on hers under the table. And did the Thorntons give in to these threats? They had no choice. They were young, just lost a baby. Their ranch was barely surviving. Mr. Wade had power, connections, the ability to make good on his threats. So they let Victor Harlow take the baby and homestead far enough away that people wouldn't make the connection. And the promissory note? When did that come into play? A few weeks later, Mr. Wade loaned Victor $300, money he needed to establish his homestead. But the loan came with conditions: that Victor never speak about what happened in 1873, that he never reveal Mr. Wade had threatened the Thorntons, that he keep silent about the blackmail for the rest of his life. Dutch Keller shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This is hearsay and speculation. Mrs. Mendoza was not present when this alleged loan was made. Sustained. Mrs. Lowell, do you have direct evidence of these claims? We do, Your Honor. Mrs. Lowell produced a document, walking it to the judge. This is a letter written by Victor Harlow to Rosa Mendoza, dated 1885. In it, he explicitly states that Clarence Wade forced him to take the loan as insurance, as a way to ensure Victor's continued silence about the blackmail. I have 3 handwriting experts prepared to verify this is Mr. Harlow's writing. Judge Harrison read the letter carefully, his expression growing increasingly troubled. Mr. Keller, your response? Your Honor, even if we accept this letter as authentic, it doesn't change the fundamental fact that a loan was made and a debt exists. The circumstances of the loan's origin don't negate the obligation to repay. They do if the loan was obtained through illegal coercion, Mrs. Lowell shot back. Contracts signed under duress are not enforceable, Mr. Keller. You know that as well as I do. Judge Harrison held up a hand. I'll rule on that legal question after hearing all the evidence. Continue, Mrs. Lowell. She called witness after witness, building a damning picture of Clarence Wade's decades of manipulation. Former neighbors who had lost land under similar circumstances. Business partners who had been threatened into unfavorable deals. A pattern so consistent, so methodical, that it could not be coincidence. But the most devastating testimony came from an unexpected source. The defense calls Earl Hoskins to the stand. An older man shuffled forward, thin and weathered, wearing clothes that had seen better days. He settled into the witness chair with the nervous energy of someone unaccustomed to courtrooms and attention. "Mr. Hoskins, where do you currently reside?" "Amarillo, Texas. But I lived in Cedar Ridge from 1882 to 1893, ran a saloon on Main Street." "And did you witness any interaction between Victor Harlow and Clarence Wade during that time?" Earl nodded vigorously. "Yes, ma'am. June 12, 1891. I remember it clear because it was my birthday. Victor came into my saloon looking for Clarence, said he had something important to discuss. Clarence was there playing cards, and when Victor approached him, they stepped outside to talk private." "And did you see what happened next?" "I followed them out, not meaning to eavesdrop, but curious. I saw Victor hand Clarence a stack of bills, counted it out, careful. $300 even. Told Clarence they were square now, that the debt was paid, and he wanted the promissory note back." The courtroom erupted. Judge Harrison's gavel cracked like gunfire. "Order! I will have order in this court." When silence returned, Mrs. Lowell continued with barely suppressed triumph. "And what did Mr. Wade do?" "He counted the money, put it in his pocket, and said he'd send the note by mail within the week." They shook hands, and Victor walked away, looking like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. "Did Victor Harlow ever receive that promissory note back?" "Not that I know of. Few months later I heard him complaining to Rosa Mendoza that Clarence kept making excuses, saying he'd misplaced it, saying he'd send it soon. Then I moved to Texas and lost track." Mrs. Lowell turned to face Clarence directly. "Your Honor, Mr. Wade accepted payment in full for this debt 8 years ago. He pocketed $300 and then deliberately withheld the return of the promissory note so he could use it as leverage later. This isn't debt collection. This is theft, fraud, and extortion." Dutch Keller was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, we dispute this testimony entirely. Mr. Hoskins is a known drunk who hasn't lived in this territory in years. His memory is clearly faulty." "My memory's just fine," Earl said indignantly. "I remember clear as day. $300, June 12, 1891, outside my saloon. Victor paid his debt fair and square." Judge Harrison looked between the two lawyers, his expression grave. "Does Mr. Wade wish to testify regarding this alleged payment?" Clarence stood slowly, his face flushed with anger and something that might have been fear. "Your Honor, I categorically deny ever receiving payment from Victor Harlow. Mr. Hoskins is either mistaken or lying, motivated by some grudge I'm not aware of." "Then where is your documentation showing the loan remains unpaid? Bank records, ledgers, anything that proves this debt still exists?" For the first time, Clarence faltered. "The records from that long ago are difficult to locate, Your Honor. I've been searching, but you have the original promissory note, which you've kept in perfect condition for 23 years, yet you've somehow lost all other documentation of this transaction." Judge Harrison's skepticism was palpable. "That strikes me as remarkably convenient, Mr. Wade." The judge turned to Mrs. Lowell. "Do you have anything else?" "Just one more piece of evidence, Your Honor. We've obtained bank records from Guthrie showing that on June 15, 1891, Clarence Wade deposited exactly $300 into his personal account. The timing matches Mr. Hoskins' testimony perfectly." She produced the bank statement, and even from across the room, Lena could see Clarence's face go pale. Judge Harrison examined the document with the careful attention of a man who understood he was looking at the linchpin of the entire case. "Mr. Keller, I'm going to give you and your client one opportunity to explain how Mr. Wade came into $300 on the exact date your alleged debtor claims to have paid him if this payment never actually occurred." Dutch Keller huddled with Clarence, their whispered conversation urgent and increasingly desperate. Finally, Keller stood. "Your Honor, we request a recess to locate additional documentation that might clarify this discrepancy." "Request denied." "You've had weeks to prepare your case, Mr. Keller. I'm not delaying justice because your evidence is inconveniently absent." Judge Harrison's voice was hard, final. "Based on the testimony and documentation presented here today, I'm ruling as follows." The courtroom held its collective breath. "The promissory note in question was obtained through coercion and blackmail. rendering it unenforceable under territorial law. Furthermore, credible evidence suggests the debt was paid in full in 1891, and Mr. Wade fraudulently withheld acknowledgement of that payment. Therefore, I'm voiding the promissory note entirely and dismissing Mr. Wade's claim against the Harlow estate with prejudice. Relief crashed over Lena like a physical wave. The courtroom erupted in noise, some cheering, others protesting, chaos descending as Judge Harrison's gavel cracked repeatedly. Furthermore, the judge continued, his voice cutting through the din, I'm referring this matter to the territorial prosecutor for investigation into possible criminal charges against Clarence Wade for fraud, extortion, and blackmail. This court is adjourned. Clarence stood frozen, his face a mask of shock and rage. Then his eyes found Lena across the room, and the hatred in them was so pure, so concentrated that she actually flinched. This isn't over, he said, his voice carrying despite the noise. You think you've won, but you've just made an enemy you can't afford, Mrs. Thornton. Before Cade could respond, before anyone could react to the threat, Lena felt something shift inside her. A sensation like water breaking, warm liquid spreading down her legs, soaking through her dress, in a rush that left no doubt about what was happening. Cade, she gasped, gripping his arm with sudden, desperate strength. The baby. It's coming. The color drained from Cade's face. Now? Right now? Yes, now. Another sensation, this one unmistakably a contraction, seized her abdomen with vicious intensity. Lena doubled over, crying out, despite her attempt to remain stoic. The courtroom chaos shifted focus immediately. Dr. Bright pushed through the crowd, his medical bag already in hand. Get her to my office, now. We don't have time to make it back to the ranch. Cade swept Lena into his arms without hesitation, carrying her toward the door while people scrambled out of his way. Through the pain and fear, Lena caught one last glimpse of Clarence Wade standing in the courtroom, his expression unreadable as he watched his enemy being carried away to face a different kind of battle entirely. The walk to Dr. Bright's office was a blur of pain and barely controlled panic. Contractions were coming faster than they should, harder than Lena had imagined possible. Rosa appeared from somewhere, her calm presence an anchor in the storm, her voice a steady stream of Spanish endearments and encouragement. Almost there, mija. Just breathe. The baby knows it's time. Your body knows what to do. Dr. Bright's office was small and cramped, never designed for childbirth, but it would have to suffice. He directed Cade to lay Lena on the examination table, then shooed him firmly toward the door. You wait outside. This is women's work. I'm not leaving her. Cade's voice was steel, immovable. Mr. Thornton, I don't have time to argue with you. Either wait outside or make yourself useful. If you're staying, you follow my orders without question. Lena reached for Cade's hand, gripping it with strength born of desperation and pain. Stay, please stay. Something in his face softened, fear mixing with determination. I'm not going anywhere. The next 3 hours were the longest of Lena's life. Pain beyond anything she had imagined, wave after wave of contractions that seemed to tear her apart from the inside. Dr. Bright's calm voice directing her breathing, telling her when to push, when to rest. Rosa's hands wiping sweat from her forehead, whispering prayers in Spanish. And Cade standing beside her through all of it, his hand crushed in hers, his face pale, but his presence unwavering. I can see the head, Dr. Bright announced. One more big push, Lena. You can do this. She bore down with everything she had left, screaming with effort and pain, and the primal need to bring this child into the world. There was a moment of impossible pressure, and then suddenly release, and the sound of a baby crying filled the small room. It's a boy, Doctor, Bright said, his voice thick with emotion. A healthy, strong boy. He placed the baby on Lena's chest, and she looked down through tears at the tiny, perfect human she had carried for 9 months. Dark hair plastered to his head, eyes squeezed shut against the bright light, tiny fists waving in protest at his sudden eviction from the warm comfort of the womb. Hello, Lena whispered, her voice breaking. "Hello, little one. I'm your mother." Cade stood frozen beside her, staring at the baby with an expression Lena could not read. Wonder, certainly, but also pain and memory, and the ghost of a child he had lost 23 years ago. "Would you like to hold him?" Lena asked softly. "I'm not his father. You're the only father he'll ever know. Thomas is gone, but you're here. You've been here through everything. Please, Cade, hold your son." The word hung between them, weighted with meaning and promise, and the choice to claim this child regardless of biology. Slowly, carefully, Cade reached out and took the baby from her arms, cradling him with a gentleness that seemed impossible for such large, capable hands. The baby settled immediately, his crying quieting to soft mewls as he nestled against Cade's chest. And Lena watched as something fundamental shifted in her husband's face, walls crumbling, grief transmuting into something that looked almost like joy. "Samuel," Lena said. "I want to name him Samuel Victor Thornton. Samuel for Dr. Bright, Victor for my father, Thornton for you." Cade looked up from the baby, his winter sky eyes bright with unshed tears. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Doctor." Bright finished his post-delivery work with efficient competence, declaring both mother and child healthy and strong. Rosa fussed over them both, already planning the celebration feast she would prepare once they returned to the ranch. As evening fell over Cedar Ridge, Lena lay on the narrow examination table with her newborn son in her arms and her husband sitting beside her, and felt something she had not experienced in months: peace. The land was saved, the battle was won, and the family she had not known she was building had just gained its newest member. Through the window, she could see people gathering in the street, news of the trial's outcome, and the baby's birth spreading through town like wildfire. Some looked pleased, others angry. But Lena found she did not care what the world thought anymore. She had fought for what mattered, had claimed the legacy her father died protecting, and now held the future in her arms. A son who would grow up knowing he was wanted, knowing he belonged to land his grandfather had tamed, and a family that had chosen him. Cade leaned over, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "You did it. Saved the land and brought a new life into the world, all in the same day. I don't know whether to be impressed or terrified." Lena laughed, the sound exhausted but genuine. Both. Definitely both. As night settled over Oklahoma territory, the Thornton family, newly expanded and battle-tested, prepared for the journey home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the work of healing and building and learning to be the family they had accidentally become. But tonight, in the small office where a baby had just entered the world and a legal victory had just been won, they rested in the knowledge that some battles were worth fighting, some promises were worth keeping, and some families were worth building from the scattered pieces of broken dreams and hard-won hope. 1 year later, summer had transformed the Oklahoma Territory into a patchwork of gold and green, the wheat harvest coming in stronger than anyone could have predicted. Lena stood at the edge of her father's land, now legally and irrevocably hers, watching the hired crew bring in the last of the crop. Samuel, balanced on her hip at 13 months old, pointed at the workers with chubby fingers and babbled enthusiastically in the nonsense language only he understood. "Yes, baby," Lena said, kissing the top of his dark head. "That's our wheat, your grandfather's wheat, growing strong just like you." The past year had been one of transformation and hard-won stability. After the trial, Clarence Wade had left Cedar Ridge in disgrace, his reputation destroyed by the exposure of decades of manipulation and fraud. The territorial prosecutor had filed criminal charges, and rather than face trial, Clarence had sold his remaining holdings and disappeared somewhere into Texas or beyond. Good riddance, most of the territory agreed. Some cancers were better excised than tolerated. Lena had thrown herself into working both her land and helping manage Cade's ranch, learning the balance between motherhood and the constant demands of frontier agriculture. Samuel had proven himself a remarkably easy baby, content to be carried in a sling while she worked, napping in a basket at the edge of whatever field required attention. Rosa had taken to grandmother status with enthusiastic devotion, spoiling the boy shamelessly and teaching him Spanish songs before he could properly speak English. Dr. Bright visited weekly, charting Samuel's growth with the proud satisfaction of someone who had delivered the child and felt personally invested in his thriving. And Cade. Cade had become the father Samuel needed in ways Lena had not quite anticipated. He was patient when the baby cried through the night, gentle when teaching him to pet the horses without fear, fiercely protective when anyone in town made comments about the child's questionable parentage. Watching them together, Lena often forgot that they did not share blood. What they shared was something deeper: choice, commitment, love that had grown slowly from partnership into something more genuine than many families built on biological connection alone. The marriage itself remained a work in progress. They still maintained separate bedrooms, though the distance between them had lessened considerably. There were nights when Cade read to her while she nursed Samuel, his deep voice wrapping around them like a blanket. Mornings when they worked side by side in comfortable silence, no longer needing words to communicate. Moments of laughter over dinner when Samuel did something particularly charming or ridiculous. And occasionally, when Lena caught Cade looking at her with an expression she could not quite name, she wondered if partnership was slowly evolving into something neither of them had planned for, but both were beginning to want. "Mrs. Thornton," one of the workers approached, hat in hand. "We're finishing up the east field. Should be done before sundown. Best yield I've seen in 5 years. Thank you, James. Make sure the men know there's bonus pay for everyone this year. Good harvest means we can afford to share the wealth." After the worker left, Lena shifted Samuel to her other hip and walked toward the small rise where her father's grave stood. She made this pilgrimage at least once a week, sometimes more when decisions weighed heavy or she needed the comfort of talking to someone who could not answer but somehow still listened. The wooden cross had been replaced with a proper headstone, Cade's gift on the first anniversary of Victor's death. Simple granite, carved with words that captured the essential truth of the man. Victor Harlow, 1845 to 1893, he made the desert bloom beloved father. "Hi, Papa," Lena said softly, settling onto the grass beside the stone. Samuel immediately tried to grab the flowers she had brought, purple wildflowers that grew along the creek. She let him hold one, guiding his hand gently away from his mouth when he tried to eat it. "The harvest came in good this year. You'd be proud. All that work you did improving the soil, it's paying off now. And Samuel here, he's growing like a weed, walking already, getting into everything." She paused, emotion tightening her throat. "I wish you could have met him. Wish you could have seen that everything you fought for, everything you sacrificed, it mattered. We're still here, Papa, still working this land. And we'll keep working it for as long as the dirt will have us." Samuel squirmed, wanting down to explore. Lena set him on the grass, where he immediately began pulling up handfuls of green and stuffing them experimentally into his mouth. She rescued him before he could actually consume anything harmful, redirecting his attention to the flowers instead. "Lena?" She turned to find Cade approaching on horseback, silhouetted against the afternoon sun in a way that made her breath catch. He had rolled up his sleeves against the heat, revealing forearms tanned dark from outdoor work, and his hat was pushed back, showing hair that was slightly too long, curling at the ends in a way he would probably have cut if he had time to care about such things. He dismounted smoothly, letting his horse graze while he joined them by the gravestone. Samuel saw him and immediately abandoned the flowers, crawling rapidly toward the man he had learned to call Da before he could properly say anything else. Cade scooped him up, tossing him gently into the air and catching him, while Samuel shrieked with delighted laughter. "There's my boy. Are you helping your mama visit your grandfather?" "He's more interested in eating grass than paying respects," Lena said with a smile. "But I suppose at 13 months, that's about what we can expect." Cade settled beside her, Samuel now contentedly playing with the buttons on his shirt. They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, watching the sun paint the western sky in shades of amber and rose. "I finished the new barn today," Cade said finally. "Miguel and the crew did excellent work. It's twice the size of the old one, should handle storage for both properties easily." "Both properties," Lena repeated, tasting the words. After the trial, after Samuel's birth, she and Cade had made the decision to merge their holdings into a single operational unit. Her land remained legally separate, protected in trust for Samuel, but they worked it together now, pooling resources and labor. It made practical sense. But it also felt like something more. A declaration that what they had built was real, permanent, worth investing in for the long term. "I was thinking," Cade continued, his tone careful in the way it got when he was broaching a subject he was not sure how she would receive, "we should probably update the property sign, the one at the main gate. It still just says Thornton Ranch." "What would you want it to say?" He was quiet for a moment, his fingers absently stroking Samuel's hair. "Harlow Thornton Ranch, or Thornton Harlow. I'm not particular about the order, but it should reflect what this place actually is. A combination of what we both brought to it." Lena felt warmth spread through her chest, emotion making her eyes prickle with tears she refused to shed. "Papa would like that, knowing his name would stay on the land, alongside yours." "It's not just about the name." Cade turned to face her, his winter sky eyes serious. "Lena, this past year, building this life together, raising Samuel, working the land side by side, it's made me realize something." Her heart began to beat faster. "What's that?" "That I don't want separate anymore. Separate bedrooms, separate lives that just happen to intersect. I want partnership to become something more. If you're willing. If you think maybe you could feel the same way." The question hung between them, weighted with a year of growing closeness, of late-night conversations and shared laughter, of watching each other with Samuel and seeing not just competence but tenderness, not just obligation but love. "I already do feel the same way," Lena said softly. "I think I have for months. I was just afraid to say it out loud, afraid it would change things, make them complicated." "Things are already complicated. We might as well be complicated together." Cade reached out, his hand cupping her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "I love you, Lena, not because I owe your father, not because you remind me of what I lost, but because you're you, stubborn and brave, and refusing to give up even when everything seems impossible. You've taught me how to live again, how to want something beyond just surviving each day." "I love you too," Lena whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and absolutely right. "You gave me and Samuel a home when we had nothing. You fought for us, protected us, became the family we needed. How could I not love you?" He leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but Lena met him halfway. Their lips touched, and unlike the brief ceremonial kiss at their wedding, this was real. Deep and searching, a promise and a question and an answer all at once. Samuel, sandwiched between them, protested with an indignant squawk, breaking the moment but not the spell. They pulled apart, laughing, and Cade shifted the baby to a more comfortable position. "So what now?" Lena asked. "Do we have another wedding? Make vows that actually mean what we're feeling this time? If you want, or we just start living like the married couple we actually are and let the rest of the world catch up to reality in its own time." Cade stood, offering his hand to help her up. "Either way, I think we should probably head home. Rosa's been cooking all day, and if we're late for dinner, she'll never forgive us." Home. The word resonated through Lena in ways it never had before. Not her father's house, not Cade's ranch, but their home. The place they had built together from grief and necessity and slowly growing love. They rode back together, Samuel secured in front of Cade on the saddle, Lena on her own horse beside them. The sun was setting in earnest now, painting the entire territory in shades of gold and crimson, the kind of sky that made you believe in new beginnings and second chances. Rosa met them at the door, her face creased with delight when she saw them arrive together. "Finally! I was beginning to think you'd forgotten how to tell time. Dinner's been ready for 20 minutes, and I won't have my hard work going cold because you two are—" She paused, her sharp eyes taking in something in their expressions, the way they stood just a little closer than before. "Ah, I see. Well, it's about time. I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you in a room together until you figured it out." "You're very subtle, Rosa," Cade said dryly, but he was smiling. "Subtle is for people with time to waste. I'm too old for subtle." She took Samuel from Cade's arms, cooing at him in Spanish. "Come, mijito. Let's get you fed while your parents finish whatever conversation they've clearly been having." After she disappeared into the house, Lena and Cade stood on the porch watching the last light fade from the western sky. "There's one more thing," Cade said, "about the land, about the future. I want to make sure Samuel inherits everything, not just your property, but mine too. I want him to have the full ranch, the whole operation. I'm going to update my will to reflect that." Lena turned to him, surprise and gratitude warring in her chest. "Cade, that's too much. He's not even your biological son. He's my son in every way that matters. He calls me Da. He runs to me when he falls down. He looks at me like I hung the moon and stars." Cade's voice was rough with emotion. "And more than that, I want him to have what neither of us had: security, options, the knowledge that the land his family built will always be there for him, no matter what." "Then we build it together," Lena said firmly. "Not just for Samuel, but for the children who might come after. For the family we're creating from all the broken pieces we started with." "Children," Cade repeated, his eyebrows rising. "Plural?" Lena felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she did not look away. "Well, Samuel should probably have a sibling or two, and now that we're actually going to be married in more than just legal terms—" She let the implication hang. Something heated and promising flickered in Cade's expression. "I think that can be arranged, though maybe we give it a few months. Let Samuel get a little older before we add another baby to the chaos." "A few months sounds reasonable." They moved inside together, drawn by the sound of Samuel's laughter and the smell of Rosa's cooking. The house that had been so quiet and mournful when Lena first arrived was now filled with life and noise and the promise of more to come. Over dinner, Rosa regaled them with stories about Samuel's day, the things he had gotten into, the new words he was trying to form. Miguel joined them, as he often did now, and the table was full of conversation in 3 languages, laughter punctuating the meal like music. After Samuel was put to bed, after the dishes were cleaned and the house settled into nighttime quiet, Lena found herself standing in the doorway of Cade's room. He looked up from the book he was reading, surprise and hope crossing his face. "I thought," Lena said, her voice only slightly unsteady, "that if we're going to stop being separate, we might as well start tonight." Cade set the book aside, standing and crossing to her. "Are you sure? We don't have to rush anything, Lena. I can wait as long as you need." "I'm sure. I've been sure for months. I was just too scared to admit it." She reached up, her hand cupping his face the way he had hers earlier. "I don't want to be scared anymore. I want to be brave enough to choose this, choose us, choose the life we're building together." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Lena felt the last walls between them crumble into dust. This was not partnership anymore. This was marriage in the truest sense. 2 people choosing each other, building something new from the ashes of what they had lost. Later, wrapped in Cade's arms, while moonlight streamed through the window, Lena thought about the journey that had brought her here. Her father's death, the desperate struggle to save his land, the marriage of convenience that had somehow become the foundation of everything that mattered. "What are you thinking about?" Cade asked, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "That sometimes the best things come from the hardest places, that losing everything can be the start of finding what you actually need." She tilted her head to look at him. "That I'm grateful for every impossible choice that led me here, even marrying a stranger to save your land? Especially that, because you stopped being a stranger the moment you chose to stay." 6 months later, on a cold January morning, Lena stood with Cade and Samuel at the entrance to their combined ranch, watching as workers installed the new sign. Hand-carved oak, beautiful and permanent, announcing to anyone who passed what this place had become. Harlow Thornton Ranch established 1893, built by Victor, saved by Lena, loved by Cade. Underneath in smaller letters, for Samuel and all who come after Samuel, now walking confidently and chattering in a mix of English and Spanish, pointed at the sign with delight. "Da, Mama, sign!" "That's right, baby," Lena said, lifting him up so he could see better. "That's our sign, our ranch, our family." Cade's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close against the winter chill. What do you think Victor would say if he could see this? Lena thought about her father, about the man who had fought so hard to give her a future worth living, who had kept secrets to protect her, who had faced down enemies and never surrendered his dignity or his land. She thought about the letter he had written, the debts he had paid, the legacy he had built from red Oklahoma dirt and immigrant determination. I think he'd say we did good. That we turned his sacrifice into something that will last. She leaned into Cade's warmth, watching the sign sway gently in the winter wind. And I think he'd be proud that we chose love instead of just survival, that we built family instead of just working land. That night, lying in the bed they now shared every night, Lena placed Cade's hand on her abdomen where a new life was just beginning to make itself known. The baby was barely 2 months along, too early to tell anyone else, but she wanted him to be the first to know. "We're going to need a bigger cradle," she said softly. "The one you built for Samuel won't accommodate two." It took him a moment to understand. Then his whole face transformed, wonder and joy erasing the last shadows of grief that sometimes still haunted his expression. "You're pregnant?" Dr. Bright confirmed it yesterday. Due in August, he thinks. Samuel will have a little brother or sister before his 2nd birthday. Cade pulled her close, his hand splaying protectively over where their child was growing. "Another Thornton," he whispered. "Another piece of the family we're building." "Harlow Thornton," Lena corrected with a smile. "Never forget the Harlow part. Never. How could I, when it gave me you?" Outside, the Oklahoma night settled over land that had seen drought and fire, desperation and triumph, loss and redemption. Land that had belonged to Victor Harlow was saved by his daughter, and now sustained the family she and Cade were creating together. The wind whispered through the wheat fields, carrying seeds to new ground, promising another harvest, another cycle of growth and hope. And in a house that had once echoed with loneliness, a family slept in peace, knowing they had fought for what mattered and won something more precious than land or money or pride. They had won each other. And in the hard territory that demanded everything and gave back only what you earned through blood and sweat and stubborn refusal to surrender, that was victory enough to build a legacy on. The land would endure, the family would grow, and the story that had begun with desperation and necessity had transformed into something neither of them had imagined possible. Love, hard won and honestly earned, was worth fighting for, after all. The end.